What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Sunday recap edition of the Sharp Angles podcast. And as seemed to be the case every single week, we come to you here at the beginning of this episode with the Philadelphia Eagles trying to either come back or hold on to win a game. This time it's against the Bills. We're going to hold off talking about that game here until we get a final. We might be headed to overtime. This game might be going for a while. If that's the case, I'm sure that Tucker Bagley, who joins me here along with Curtis Hirsch, I'm sure that he will be distracted the entire time. But
No, I'm fully
that's
locked
fine.
in.
That's fine. No, you could be distracted. I understand. This is a massive game for the Eagles, massive game for the Bills and their playoff chances. So, a lot going on, and we'll get to that once we kind of figure out where we're going here. I guess we can just start with week 12 as a whole, Curtis. We'll go to you. We'll let Tucker agonize over this over this drive. We'll go with you, Curtis. Kind of overall with Week 12, we had the Thanksgiving games, we had the Friday game. What are your kind of thoughts coming here out of Week 12? Any big takeaways as we're kind of moving forward here?
Okay, I'll fix one of the things you said. It's not that big of a game for the Eagles. I think they're still in sole command of the NFC. They have after the next 2 weeks, they'll win out the rest of their season, and they're probably going to go 1-2 or 1-1 at worst against the Cowboys and the 49ers over the next 2 weeks. So I believe they're still on track to get the bye and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So I don't think this is a big loss if they don't come back. And I think this game meant the season for the Bills. So back to that, I enjoyed Thursday's games way more than this morning's games. Oh, it was a slugfest this morning. My kids were wondering why I was upstairs, and they're like, "What's up, Dad?" I'm like, "These games are brutal. This was one of the tougher weeks to watch this morning's games." So a little bit.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit because we did still have Texans Jaguars,
which started off slow too. It started off slow, and then once they opened up the offenses, but even the Jaguars, there was some really galaxy brain thinking in that game too. Like they ran the ball a ton when they're having success through the air, and then I'm sure we're going to get to some of the play calls in that game down the road.
Actually, too. I think we should just start there with that game. I mean, it was a very big game, not quite on the level of Eagles and Bills here, but it was a big game. The winner of that was going to, not win, but take the lead in the AFC South. Because the Jaguars won, they actually were the number one seed for a short time until the Chiefs, took care of business and came back against the Raiders. So it was a big game there for the Jaguars. And you mentioned with the Texans, the galaxy brain kind of play calling where CJ Stroud was great in this game again.
He's still so good.
It was still amazing in this game, but there were just some very odd play calls. I think the biggest one, the one that's most notable, is the one where they were 4th and 1 or 3rd and like half yard.
They were half yard at most.
And they threw 2 passes, 30+ yards downfield. They turned it over on downs. They had a real chance to win this game. Like they probably should have won this game. But it was just odd play call after odd play call. And it was an odd situation, Curtis. What we saw the Texans. I think what we saw in this game is how good the Texans have been, and how good DeMeco Ryans has been, and how good CJ Stroud has been. This is still a first-year coach. This is still a rookie quarterback. And we saw some kind of odd situation. Even taking that sack that he took that ultimately made it a much longer field goal that they just dinked off the bottom of the upright. All of that is kind of like, okay, we're dealing with still first-year coach, first-year quarterback, stuff like that.
Doug Peterson is a Super Bowl winning coach, and there was some questionable calls on that side too. So it's going to happen, and the Texans have that arena was absolutely jacked for that game. So kudos to them, and it's going to be a lot of good years ahead for the Texans. So we're seeing the kind of playmakers that Stroud and Dell are. So they lost today, but no big deal. This season has been so good for them, and I think there's a lot of good looking forward for them.
Well, Tucker, I don't want to distract you too much from these big plays happening, but I do want to mention that this is now 2 really good games from Trevor Lawrence in a row, and that Trevor Lawrence had been getting, I think, some deserved criticism about how he had been playing. I think it was warranted. People were kind of questioning it, but that has not been the case the last 2 weeks. They've got this massive win now here. I mean, I think they've turned the corner a little bit here, and this Jaguars team is looking good, looking to be in a great spot to go and, make the playoffs and maybe make some noise there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because they're almost forgotten in the hierarchy of the AFC, right? And I think we came in, especially at the beginning of the season, with the idea that, there's probably 3 or maybe 4 teams that could win the conference. And, Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, and maybe throw Miami in there. And Jacksonville, even though they won the division last year, or at least they made the playoffs. I don't know if they won the division or if that was Tennessee, but they made the postseason a year ago. You have a Super Bowl winning coach in Doug Peterson, who I think highly of. You have Trevor Lawrence, who, hopefully he can take a second-year jump in that system. And what we've seen is they just keep winning. I mean, you mentioned the fact that they were the number 1 seed in the AFC for only a few minutes or like an hour today after their win over Houston, and a game like today, I was a huge game for them, right? Being able to take that lead in the division, to really get a stranglehold of the AFC South. I mean, that's a huge win for Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence as they try to, continually build towards the postseason, despite not really having anybody thinking that they belong at the top of the AFC.
People are generally disappointed in the Jaguars this year, and they're at the top of the AFC. Like, what kind of expectations did we have for them? Like, I know Doug Peterson's a second half guy as well, so it's one of those things.
They're just not. They're not winning like convincingly a lot. There were some of even their wins early in the season that weren't super convincing. They had that massive, they just got blown out by the 49ers, but they have a win over the Bills, the Bills that we're watching right now and seeing what they're going to do here against the Eagles. They have a win against the Bills, albeit in London. So there are, they played the Chiefs tough as they tend to, it seems like. That seems to be a running thing with the Jaguars playing the Chiefs tough. So I think that it's warranted there. What I will say is, the Texans had all the momentum, all the kind of, this is, we're playing really well, we're coming for this division. Now the Jaguars have kind of put that to rest a little bit. But it's a game of inches. It's an absolute game of inches, because that field goal could have gone in and we go to overtime, or if that throw to Singletary was, just a little bit closer to him, then they get a, maybe get a first down. So game of inches, this division's close, and it's going to be really fun to watch this rivalry between Lawrence and Stroud the rest of the way, as long as we get it. Hopefully we get it for a long time to come. So we're going to get to the Eagles and Bills game. It's really coming down to the wire now. We'll get to that as it starts in. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention we just launched a huge Cyber Monday sale. Right now, you can use code SHARP71, and you'll get 71% off every single package we offer, whether you are interested in our betting package, our all-access package, which comes with betting and fantasy, props package, just our fantasy package. All of that is available to you, 71% off, using code SHARP71. Our betting recommendations have been on fire coming into this week. We were 22-9 on NFL sides and totals. For the month of November, we've been killing it this month. And so, come and check us out. You'll get 71% off, Sharp71. Make sure you do that. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, we do this live every Sunday. That's why we're sitting here watching this Eagles game with bated breath. We do this live every Sunday on YouTube. Search Warren Sharp on YouTube. You'll find our channel. Subscribe. Come and join us. Join the conversation, and that'll be a fun time for everybody. All right, let's talk a little bit about those Chiefs. We mentioned the Chiefs. They went down 14-0 at one point in their game against the Raiders. It looked like all these struggles that we've seen from them, they were kind of coming to a head here, and then they outscored the Raiders 31-3 the rest of the way, and they kind of walked into an easy victory. And I guess, Curtis, the question is, I've been kind of raising some red flags, some alarm flags about these Chiefs for a while, even before last week. Their most recent second half touchdown before today was in week 7 against the Chargers. They had been having some issues. This kind of feels like maybe it's a turning point. The offense turned around and everything looked a lot better than it had in the last few weeks.
Yeah, over the last couple of weeks, you have mentioned that there's some warning signs in their game, and I was like, well, they had a lot of drop passes the first loss of the year. They Kadarius Toney passed one to the Lions, which ended up as a pick 6, and they're missing Kelsey. And then the last game went right through MVS's hands. And this will sort itself out. And then to start the way they did today, there was alarm bells going off. I just assumed they were going to stroll into that game. And what did they end up? 31-3 was the ending after being down. I just assumed that's how the game was going to finish, was 31-3. Yeah. So the fact they didn't show up to start that game, it's worrisome. And Patrick Mahomes is still the best quarterback. The defense is still really good, but they did get gashed by a pretty easy to understand offense that was just running the ball right at them early on. So I don't know what to think about the Chiefs anymore. I still think they have the best player in the game. The tight end is really good when he's focused, and we'll see what happens. It's a lot closer in the AFC than I imagined it being.
And so you mentioned Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs has a big game here, 20 for 110 with 1 touchdown. He had a long of 53 yards. He had a 53-yard touchdown that actually gave them that 14-0 lead. And so, that kind of inflates the numbers just a little bit. It looks like the field goal is good. Oh my goodness.
We got overtime.
I'm sorry, Tucker. I just ruined it.
Spoiler alert. My goodness.
Spoiler alert. Jake Elliott. Just to catch everybody up on the podcast, we're trying to get through this while also keeping an eye on the Eagles. Jake Elliott just hit a 59-yard field goal, just snuck it through the right upright, and it looks like we are going to overtime. We'll see what the Bills are able to do here. We still got a little bit of time left, but yeah, that is a massive kick from a weapon for y'all, Tucker. Like, it is hard to. He's kind of getting into that. I don't know. He's not Justin Tucker, but he's kind of getting into that realm of being a absolute advantage for y'all to have a kicker like that.
Yeah, and I think until this year, Justin Tucker had only missed one kick to tie or go ahead in the final 5 minutes of the game, and he ended up making a kick in overtime to win it anyway after it happened. I think he's missed a couple this year, but. Yeah, I mean, what Jake Elliott's done since he's been an Eagle, go back to his rookie year, he made a 61-yarder to beat the Giants to kind of kick off that season. He made 2, I think, 47-plus-yarder field goals in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl to win that game. And then this year, I mean, on a wet, sloppy field where really no one could throw the ball, to make a 59-yarder after a pair of false start penalties on Jason Kelsey, to put yourself in that situation, unreal. I mean, to have a kicker like that who's just a weapon, it's crazy when you consider that, plus what the Eagles are capable of doing in short yardage with, the quarterback sneak. It's kind of funny. Like, this is a team that's been outgained by a ton this week. They've been outgained by a ton the last 4 or 5 weeks, but because they have success around the margins and can play situational football like that, it's a huge advantage for them.
Yeah, I'm looking here at his Pro Football Reference page because I want to make sure I write about this. He is, but here we go. So I guess that would make him 25 of 36 on 50-plus yard field goals for his career, which is wild. That is a wild number. And yeah, we're heading to overtime about the Chiefs. While we're getting there, Tucker, do you have any thoughts about the Chiefs here and kind of what we saw from them today?
Yeah, I mean, it was just good to see them score in the second half for the first time in a while. And this is a team that you go back to, some of their best moments in the playoffs. They fell behind, 21-0, came back and won. They fell behind 28-0 to the Texans, and Patrick Mahomes came back and won. And what they did today, Las Vegas has always kind of been a little bit of a thorn in their side. And Max Crosby was out there, which I'm still not sure how that happened. We can talk about that if we want to get deep into injury conspiracies.
To let people into the behind the scenes is I am the only other injury nerd that is willing to talk with Tucker about the wild things we see on injury reports. He sends me, you send me the Patriots injury report every week, just an absolute anger about the way they do things. But we were talking on Sunday when it looked like Max Crosby was going to play, and then Darius Slayton played as well through a doubtful tag, about how often this happens. And that was the first time it had happened since 2020. It doesn't happen very often. We had 2 this week. It was a very odd kind of injury report week. I'm not sure what's going on there.
Yeah, and that one in 2020 was a concussion. He was doubtful and then he miraculously progressed through concussion protocol. It was Allen Robinson in 2020. So for Max Crosby and Darius Slayton to play this week, I thought was a little crazy, but I guess some guys have to play at times when they're doubtful to make it doubtful and not an automatic out. But yeah, I mean, to see the Chiefs and Travis Kelce and Pacheco had a decent day. He got the touchdown in the second half, but I think for them, it's just a classic Andy Reid kind of game, Andy Reid kind of move, where he's had teams that have struggled. They look dead in the water mid-season. Then he finds a tweak or two. He figures out what needs to be fixed. And then by the end of the season, they're back in the conference championship game or contending for a Super Bowl. So, I mean, for me, it felt like a matter of when, not if, this team would kind of figure it out. And, maybe Travis Kelce isn't the guy he's been for the last decade, but today proved like he still is a weapon at tight end in a league where there isn't really a whole lot of weapons at tight end.
I am interested to see kind of the route participation for Rashee Rice, because we did see him be heavily used in this game. He got 10 targets. He converted 8 for 107 and a touchdown, including that touchdown was a long catch and run. And that is what they need. They need one of their wide receivers to step up. It has been Rice. Rice has been the best one, but for whatever reason, they've been hesitant to really make him a full-time wide receiver. I wonder if we're going there. I am very interested to see kind of what the route numbers look like whenever we get those. So that would help a lot. And you brought up the point that Rich Rebar has made to me since I've been kind of concerned about this Chiefs offense is, yeah, we kind of see this a lot. And they figure it out because they have Patrick Mahomes and they have Andy Reid and they have Travis Kelce. And as it turns out, when you have those three people, three of the best to ever do it at their position or job, then you're in pretty good shape. Let's move on to some injuries here. There actually weren't a ton of injuries this week. Thankfully, we did get a bad one on Friday with Jalen Phillips and his Achilles, which was really tough for that Dolphins defense. But one game where we did see some injuries, both to wide receivers, was in the Saints game against the Falcons. The Saints lost Chris Olave to a concussion. They lost Rashid Shaheed to a thigh. They had already lost Michael Thomas to a knee injury. He's now on injured reserve. I mean, Tucker, they're running out of people to throw to at this point.
Yeah, and as someone who has Alvin Kamara on his fantasy, and by all means, just keep loading it up to him. But yeah, I mean that right now their receiving core is really banged up, and you add the fact that Michael Thomas is on the IR, as you mentioned. I don't really know who they have at the top of their depth chart right now. Like I think they signed Keith Kirkwood, former Temple Owl, to their practice squad earlier in the month. So maybe he gets some touches and some run here. But for a Saints team that lost the lead of the division this week to the Falcons, which is a crazy thing to say out loud this late into the season. I mean, you look at who they target. It's really Kamara and Taysom Hill are the only two guys who are healthy right now with over 20 targets. Like that's crazy. You have to throw it to somebody, and it's not like Derek Carr is a guy who can turn anybody into the second coming of Jerry Rice. So I'm not really sure where that offense goes, especially vertically.
And the Rashid Shaheed one, it looked a little, I don't know, thigh injury for a guy like him. Concussion is a concussion. We'll see what happens with Olave. There's not a lot to say about that. But the thigh injuries to Shaheed, that could be an issue with kind of receiver he is. And you were looking for names. And Curtis, I know you've got a name.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Already got it. You've got it loaded up for us.
Tucker's not a big Lynn Bowden fan, is he? I'm sure he came into the league as a running back, but I guess he's got some pass catching chops as well. So
I think quarterback at Kentucky for a while, so he can do it all.
He's going to take over Shaheed's kind of short area role, I'd assume. And yeah, Shaheed had a towel over his head at one point, and I don't have high hopes of that. It looked worse than a thigh injury because he kind of knew right away and he was hobbling off. So we'll see how that goes. But if they can't afford to lose Olave for a week, so if he doesn't make it back for their next game, there's not a lot of options over there. You're looking at Kamara, who didn't even get any targets on the game, their last drive of the game. So kind of concerning. And yeah, Derek Carr got to the red zone how many times today? And they kicked 5 field goals. Just what are we doing here? Yeah,
they got inside the 25-yard line, so not quite to the red zone, but they got inside the 25-yard line 6 times.
And a pick
4
six.
of those were field goals. 1 was a lost fumble, and 1 was a pick 6. The only touchdown Derek Carr threw in the red zone today was the pick 6. And that has been a consistent problem for the Saints team. The Saints are 29th in red zone touchdown rate and 30th in red zone scoring rate. That's been a consistent issue for Carr going back several years now. If you want to go read a kind of scathing tweet thread about that from Warren Sharp, I'm sure you can go and find that on the internet somewhere. It has been an issue for them. They've just gave up a ton of opportunities here. Now they're hurt. Now Marshawn Lattimore's on injured reserve. Now Michael Thomas is on injured reserve. Now they are without these wide receivers. It is not going the right way for this team, and you're worried. You're really worried about kind of what we're going to see. But for the Falcons, I mean, they beat the Saints. They lead the NFC South, an NFC South that has no teams over 500. They lead that. It was a lot of the same from Desmond Ridder in this game. Made some wow throws. He had a really nice throw early in the game to Drake London, made some bad plays. He is who he is, but they got Bijan going. Bijan had a massive game, made some big plays with their stars, and they won. And now they're in the lead in the NFC South. I don't know what else to say about it, Curtis.
Yeah, they're just don't lose the game for us. That is all Art Smith must tell Desmond Ridder every time he goes on the field. Just don't turn the ball over. We've got Bijan, we got Pitts in London. Well, they don't really use Pitts, but Bijan showed how good he is today. Just don't make a stupid play. That's all you have to do. And they're good enough to win these games. And they're not pretty wins, but they got it done again today. And with the Saints injury report, I would say the Falcons have the leg up on them to win that division now.
Especially the Bucs lost. We'll get to that in a second, but the Bucs lost to the Colts. And so, that helps them out in that regard as well. And Tucker, we were talking, right before their bye week, is Arthur Smith going to kind of survive what we saw and what we had seen from this team? And now here we are, a couple weeks later, and it looks like they might be in the playoffs. It's been a wild ride for the Falcons so far this year.
Yeah, it's crazy because you mentioned that, and I think the last coach to be fired after he made the playoffs was Mike Mularkey with Tennessee, right? He got fired, and they brought in Vrabel. But I just think it's funny. Like right now, Atlanta, probably wins the division. I'm sure they're the odds-on favorite to win the division right now. And you kind of look at their upcoming wild card matchup, should it happen. I mean, the Cowboys or the Eagles are going to be in the top wild card team, right? Like they're going to be 7.5, 8-point favorites on the road wild card weekend against a division winner. It's going to be weird. And you mentioned, like, if you're Arthur Smith and you go into a meeting with ownership in the front office at the end of the year, you can say, look, I made the playoffs without a quarterback. That gotta be worth something. But it feels like there's more that has to be done. And there's a number of teams like Atlanta right now that are in a playoff spot or, looking for a playoff spot. A team like Cleveland comes to mind who's winning despite not having much offensively, although they didn't today. And they're kind of in a situation where I think at the end of the season, the front office and the ownership won't be happy with how they played, but they're going to be able to say, we made the playoffs. We got to where we were supposed to get. Maybe we exceeded expectations based on the results. But for a team like Atlanta, same thing. Like if you told people after 12 weeks, you're in first place in the division after beating the Saints, they'd be partying in the streets instead of thinking like, hey, maybe this coach isn't it. Maybe Desmond Ridder isn't it, just because of how terribly they've played through 11 games so far.
I'm glad you mentioned the potential first round because I kind of trolled Curtis a little bit in the sheet when I said we're setting up for a hilarious first round Cowboys loss. So would you like to respond to that slander and that libel there, Curtis?
I can't say over live air what I wrote back in this sheet for that. But yeah, I'm enjoying the fact that I think we are going to be an Eagles-Cowboys second round matchup. And as a Cowboys fan, I would rather go to the Eagles than I'd rather go to the 49ers right now. I think the way we've seen the Eagles be in these close games, get outgained every game, and then we've seen the 49ers offense, it can't be stopped right now, and then the defense is starting to pick up as well. So although the Eagles are the number one seed, I think the class of the NFC is the 49ers. So I'm getting ready for what would be a very exciting second round matchup. And yeah, they're not losing to the Falcons. Mike McCarthy will never win the game again.
That would be the end of Mike McCarthy. I think we could pretty safely say that. Tucker, you brought up the Browns. They lost the Broncos today. Suffered some injuries in that game. Dorian Thompson-Robinson left to be evaluated for a concussion, never came back. Amari Cooper left very late with a ribs injury. It was a big hit. It did not look great. He was ruled out. You mentioned kind of how they've been struggling here on offense. DTR, if you look at the last two games, has averaged 4.2 yards per attempt. It has not been pretty. I get why they tried to use DTR, but regardless of kind of whatever his injury situation is, if he has a concussion, if he doesn't, kind of whatever that is, regardless of that, I think we have seen enough to know that upside swing wasn't it, and they need to try something else, whether that be go back to your favorite quarterback, PJ Walker, or to see what Joe Flacco has, promote him off the practice squad, which seems most likely to me. Then yeah, we're looking at a situation that needs to change, because this team might not even make the playoffs if this offense continues playing this way, right, Tucker?
Yeah, I mean, this was a team that if they had won today, there was a scenario where they could have had the top seed in the AFC. And I think the Broncos are another team that's kind of forgotten now as they, try to wade their way up into the postseason mix. But I mean, they're just getting nothing offensively right now. And there's a situation where I think quarterbacks tend to, make their money on third downs, right? If you can get a quarterback who can consistently keep the chains moving on third down, you can at least put some semblance of an offense together. And they were 2 for 13 on third down today. And that's pretty much been a pattern for them this season. And I think their defense is great. I don't think anyone can argue that. But when your offense right now is just giving you nothing, they scored 1 touchdown today. They turned the ball over 3 times. And, they were down 14-12 about midway through the third quarter. And then everything just kind of fell apart at the end. And yeah, right now it's tough because we talk about the Jets not having a quarterback. And I think the Browns are right there where they have an elite defense who I think if they made the postseason could certainly make some noise. But right now with that offense, it doesn't take much to stop them. And they don't necessarily have an elite running game with Nick Chubb out for the season where they could, kind of lean on him to at least keep them ahead of the chains where they're not stuck in, 2nd and 9 and 3rd and 10 situations.
It's funny you mentioned the Jets because Joe Flacco was with the Jets last year, if I'm right. He was one of their trio of terrible quarterbacks. So we, maybe we're going to get a redux of that and see that again. I'm glad you mentioned the Broncos and how well they're doing, Curtis. I think we definitely need to talk about that. Their defense is back. That 70-point shellacking by the Dolphins is in the distant memory now. The defense is back. The offense is doing enough. Sean Payton has managed to rein in Russell Wilson, and that offense is doing enough. They've won 5 in a row. They don't have the easiest schedule the rest of the way. They get the Texans, Chargers, Lions, Patriots, Chargers, and Raiders there. It's not as easy as somebody like the Colts, for instance, who we'll talk about in a second. But the Broncos are definitely in the mix here in the playoffs, and that is an astounding turnaround based on kind of what we saw early in the season.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a different angle. I think it's more of an indictment on the league than it is the Broncos turnaround. Russell Wilson completed 13 passes for 130 yards today, and they won in dominant fashion. Sean Payton has realized that this league has a quarterback problem, and if he cannot turn the ball over, they're going to be in every game moving forward. And that's what they've done. They've been on really the positive. I'm not sure what their turnover differential over this 5-game winning streak is, but they've won the turnover battle in every game. They've kept it simple, not letting Russ throw the ball deep, and they've won 5 in a row. So he's realized that they don't have to put up 40 every week to win, and he's done a good job of that. But it still leaves me wanting more because it's not an ideal way to win. And what happens when they do make the playoffs? What do you do with Russ going forward? Do you keep him? I'm sure they probably 4 weeks ago they already knew his buyout number, and we're doing the paperwork for that after this year. But they keep winning. It's ugly football. But what do you do with him moving forward?
Well, I'm going to try to pull it up real quick to make sure I get the numbers right. But I don't think they really have a choice in that whole is Russ going to be our quarterback thing moving forward, because I believe next year the number is still –
it's staggering.
It's still massive.
It would have been the biggest buyout in history. But then did they move him to a team that wants a quarterback and he redoes his contract? There's got to be options, but they're winning. So
a lot of that, even if they trade him, because of a lot of that is the bonus on the dead cap. So the dead cap next year for him is $85 million is their dead cap. His cap hit is only 35.4, which means even if you do like a post June 1st cut, you're still looking at a massive hit to your salary cap. And so essentially you would be taking up more of your salary cap to not have Russell Wilson on the team. And that's probably not feasible for them either way. But as it stands now, he's done what Sean Payton's asked him to do. I think your point of what happens when they're asked to do more, like they're kind of just the Falcons at this point, in that their defense is playing better. They're able to kind of win these games and keep them close, but and it's gone well. They're on the right side of it over the last few games, of the last 5 games. They've won 5 in a row with some big wins over that stretch. And so they need to be commended for that. But you're right that the question is kind of what's the upside here for this team if this is kind of the way we're trying to play. The other kind of team in this tight playoff race with the Bills, who we're still waiting for the end of that game. Bills got a field goal. Jalen Hurts just connected with Devonta Smith for a big game that gets the Eagles close to field goal range. Although I don't know what field goal range is for the Eagles anymore. Perhaps it's 90 yards. I'm not sure. Yeah, in the stadium. We'll see.
If you're on the grass, you're in field goal range for Jake Elliott.
But yeah, so we'll kind of see that. But the other team that's in here is the Colts, astoundingly. Curtis, the Colts are still in this. Their defense was not outstanding against the Bucks. They let Rachaad White run for 100 yards on just 15 carries. I did not actually know that was possible. I did not know that Rachaad White could run for 100 yards in a game. And so it was impressive to see that. But they're right here in the thick of this playoff race, right for that 7th seed. They have the Titans, the Bengals, the Steelers, the Falcons, the Raiders, and the Texans the rest of the way. 3 of those are very winnable. 2 more of those you would really like their chances in. We might be looking at a Gardner Minshew in the playoff situation here, Curtis, and that would be amazing.
If they make the playoffs, Shane Steichen has to win Coach of the Year. They had went through the Jonathan Taylor drama at the beginning of the year. They lost their 4th overall pick early on in the season. Their defense is a tire fire, and they continue to win these games. They just find ways to win. So I'm impressed. Shane Steichen is definitely doing the right things over there. And I can't believe that they're in this playoff race, especially in the AFC. If you would have said at the beginning of the year, the Colts are going to be in the playoff race, pretty wild. And here they are. And without their starting quarterback, with all the Jonathan Taylor drama, they're here.
Yeah, and with a defense that is not good. It is still not good. And they continue to, we talk about, I feel like Rich and I on the Thursday podcast talk about the Colts every week because the Colts game environment every week is great for fantasy. I mean, Mike Evans went off again. Jonathan Taylor had 2 touchdowns. Like it's great for fantasy. It always is really good.
Rachaad White had 96 yards.
I don't even understand the Rachaad White line, but yeah, that is what we had here. And so it keeps happening. They keep playing this way and they're winning, and they've got a schedule down the stretch that, it sets up pretty well for them to be able to at least make a run at the playoffs here. Another team that's kind of in that situation are the Rams. The Rams beat the Cardinals. They're only a game out of the playoffs. This was an impressive performance from the Rams. The Cardinals with Kyler Murray have been playing well. They absolutely destroyed this team. It was 37-14. It wasn't even that close. Kyron Williams came back and just dominated this team. 16 for 143 on the ground. He added 6 catches for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. And they were able to do all of this without Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp doing much at all. Cooper Kupp 3 of 18, Puka Nacua 4 for 27, and the Rams dominated. They are a game out. They're playing pretty well. At least Matthew Stafford looked back to playing more like early season Matthew Stafford in this game. And I don't know. I think we might be looking at the Rams in the playoffs, it would just be wild. It would be wild, Tucker.
Yeah, the NFC is just a weird group where I think we could argue the top 4 teams in the NFC, if you want to throw the Lions in there, might be the best 4 teams in the NFL. And after that, I just don't think there's anyone deserving of a playoff spot. It's such a weird juxtaposition between the 2 conferences where the top 4 teams in the NFL might be in the NFC. The next 8 or 9 might all be in the AFC. It's so weird how everything is kind of shaken out this season.
Yeah, I don't know about the Lions anymore after kind of what we've seen the last 2 weeks, but I definitely think, and I mean, we'll see. We're still waiting on the Eagles here. They are in a good spot here to win this game. Ooh, now they're within the 12. If you're listening to some podcasts, you already know what happens. But we'll see what happens with the Eagles. But the Eagles are very clearly one of the best teams. The 49ers, after that very odd 3-game, they've losing streak, they've come back and they've just absolutely dominated coming out of the bye. Their offense looks like unstoppable. The Cowboys have their point differential ever since they've allowed Dak Prescott to start throwing the ball. It's wild when you allow your offense to play the way it's designed to play, Curtis. It's wild that it's successful. It's very interesting how that would happen. And so, yeah, the NFC has a lot of very, very good teams. Did we do it, Tucker? Tucker called it.
According to Twitter, they have. I have yet to see it. I think Jalen Hurts is about to run in on a quarterback draw here from 12 yards out to win 37.
That is correct.
Nice.
That is correct. Jalen Hurts,
and there he goes, to us 10-5 touchdown.
Tucker is finally he's can join the podcast now.
I'm going to interrupt this. We've got an important.
Was that the longest
we've got an important
game ever?
Play or question in the chat.
We're like 5 minutes away from Sunday Night Football starting.
That is the longest. That's one of the longer games we've watched today. We're going to get to the Eagles in a second. There is a question in there from Dylan. I agree. We should get to it. Safest play out of these in full PPR: OBJ, Keaton Mitchell, and Ty Chandler. I haven't, because we've been talking, I haven't seen inactives yet. I'm assuming OBJ is active if we're getting asked this question.
He's active, but I'm sure his arm is in pain and he's going to be more of a decoy out there.
The answer to that question is there isn't a safe play there. There's not a safe play there. I guess Keaton Mitchell is probably who I would play, but there's not a safe play in that group is what I would say. All right, let's transition here into talking about the Bills and the Eagles. We actually have a question in the chat that's good. Do we see big changes coming from the Bills in the offseason as their window closed? As we mentioned, we were kind of talking about this game in the background of the podcast. This is a massive game for the Bills. They end up losing it in overtime. It was a very good game. They've showed that they're right there with the Eagles, but their record now does not suggest that. Their record now is, it's looking rough. We've talked about their schedule the rest of the way. This Bills team is in a fight for the playoffs with a tougher schedule than a team like the Colts, with a tougher schedule than a team like the Broncos. And the question from Tristan is, do we see big changes coming from the Bills in the offseason? They've started to make those changes already, Curtis. I think we'll have to see how it plays out, because this team is obviously very good. They took the Eagles to the brink. This team is very good. But if they don't make the playoffs, then they have to tear it down at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to tear it down. I think you just have to make one easy change, and they gave up 17 points.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. They gave up 17 points in the fourth quarter and then couldn't get a stop. That's on one guy. That's the guy calling the defense. That's the head coach. The defense is his baby, and they gave up 23 points in the last 13 or so minutes, and that's a problem. And you've got an offense that can score when they need to. The offense has never been the problem. So I know their salary cap issues are of concern, but there's ways around that. But I think they're definitely in for a coaching change, and then see what happens, right? A little bit of fresh voice in there. Maybe Josh Allen is a little smilier during some of his press conferences, and you never know what can happen. But they still have a lot of talent on that team. Don't think their window is closed, but I think they do need to make a change.
Yeah, and I think that we still need to watch what happens the rest of the season. As we saw in this game, this team can beat anybody. And so maybe they're going to get on a good run and go through and still make the playoffs and still be the Bills we think, and maybe this is all moot. It could be a lot like with Arthur Smith a few weeks ago, where suddenly that looks like, well, okay, well, we're going to see what happens. But I do think this season has been a bit of a wake-up call that, not everything is great. They've been going so well ever since Josh Allen. Brian Daboll turned everything around with Josh Allen. Josh Allen turned into one of the best players in the league, which he very clearly still is. Everything had been going up and up and up and up. And this is kind of the first time we've seen. Well, they had some issues last season, with Allen was hurt, but this is really the first, like, okay, what are we doing here kind of situation. They fired the offensive coordinator already. That screams of a coach that feels like he's on the hot seat. And now they've lost this game to the Eagles. They have this schedule coming up. It's kind of rough here, Tucker. But I actually want to talk about the Eagles more because the Eagles were out of this game like 5 different times, and somehow they won this game. And that the Eagles of the last 2 years, that is what this team has been a lot of to me. Last year they were able to blow out teams, but this year specifically, they've just been able to be resilient. They lost that one to the Jets; it wasn't good, but against the Commanders when they shouldn't have been in those games, they were able to win them. Against the Patriots when that shouldn't have been a game, they were able to win it. This team just keeps the Chiefs last week. This team just kind of keeps coming out of these holes, keeps finding what they need to do to win, and that would be promising for me if I'm a Chiefs fan. Is that kind of how you're feeling? I mean, Eagles fan. Is that how you're feeling?
It's just a weird thing because the Bills dominated this game. Like if you just look strictly at the box score, Bills got 5 more first downs, converted 13 to 22 on third downs. They outgained the Eagles by like 140 yards, although the Eagles did average more yards per play as the game wore on. The Eagles played probably their worst half of football in the first half of this game, and I said the same thing on Monday night when the Eagles fell behind the Chiefs. I thought that was their worst half of football all season, save for maybe the end of that Jets game they lost, and they just kind of pull it out in the end. Like they do enough winning plays to figure it out. And I think for Jalen Hurts, I don't know, his numbers aren't getting impressive. He was 18 to 31 for 200 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick, and added 65 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. But I don't know, just the way he buckles down in the second half, the way he's so unbothered by his own struggles in the first half, the way he's so just stoic throughout the game, I think might be his best quality over everything else. I mean, what this team does on a week-to-week basis, it's just weird. Like, you just kind of expect them to win. Even today when they were down 21-14 at the hat, or 21-14 going into the fourth quarter, just kind of felt like, yeah, they'll figure it out. They'll be in it at the end. They're not going to get blown out. And they pull out another one again. And so far, this gauntlet that they had in their schedule, this 6-week run where they had the Cowboys, the Chiefs, the Bills, 49ers, Cowboys again in Seattle, they started out 3-0, and now they have a 2-game lead over everybody else in the NFC. And all they have to do is really go 1-1 in their next 2 games. If they can split with San Francisco and Dallas, they pretty much have the 1 seed wrapped up in the NFC, which I just think is crazy to say after kind of watching their struggle, like just the way they pull themselves through the mud on a week-to-week basis. It's a weird team to watch because they're great for this kind of content because they win every week and everybody's happy, but there's a million things to complain about Monday morning.
Yeah, I put a bet when it was that score. I put a live in-game bet on the Eagles. So I'm feeling pretty good about that Jalen Hurts rushing touchdown as well, because like you said, this seems to be, the Jets loss, that was not, they got on the wrong side of it that time, but otherwise they've been able to do this and come out of bad situations. And you would like them to not have to do that. You'd like them to be blowing out teams more often like they were last year. I'm sure that would make Tucker's heart feel a little bit better from week to week. But I do think that ability, like you mentioned it, the kind of just calmness of Jalen Hurts and that ability to be the best they can be in these late game scenarios, that is important for a team as they try to push for a Super Bowl, because that's all that matters for this team at this point. We know how good they are. Like you said, they've got a really good shot at the number 1 seed. This is a Super Bowl level team, and to have that from your quarterback really makes you feel a lot better about your chances when you get there. So we finally got to the end. We got to the end of that game, but now I think we're kind of at the end of the podcast. We did have a couple other topics that I'm so happy we don't have to talk about. The Panthers are terrible. I don't want to talk about them. Mac Jones was benched again. What are you doing? Let's find a plan, Patriots. I don't want to talk about them. So I'm glad we're not talking about them. But how about waiver wire? Anybody on the waiver wire? We mentioned Lynn Bowden. We mentioned A.T. Perry. Anybody else on the waiver wire kind of sticking out to you this week, Curtis?
Yeah, unfortunately, we got to go to some of the uglier offenses. Devontae Parker returned today, and his rookie wide receiver and left with a concussion. So you're looking at Devontae Parker. I know it's not pretty. I can't remember the other one here. I'm just gonna take a quick.
That's about all we got.
I got Cedric Tillman as well. When Joe
okay.
Flacco, I don't know if Joe Flacco can make it to the outside and hit him with it's just going to be David Njoku target after target. But he looked good. He's starting to get incorporated more into the offense. So again, I said not teams we want to target on, but those are where the injuries are happening. So yeah.
And I believe Tillman had at least a decent game today, and we mentioned that Amari Cooper left that game with a ribs injury. It was a really big hit on him. I actually can't find the Broncos here. Maybe it's better for me not to look at that Broncos box score. But so I think that's a good call out there for Tillman. You would think they traded Donovan Peoples-Jones, and you would think the reason they did that is because they wanted to get Tillman more involved, and we've kind of seen that happen a little bit. So I think that's a good call out. All right. Moving forward, we're moving into week 13. The season is flying by. Tucker, are you just lost in euphoria? Can you think about week 13, what we have coming up? Anything that's interesting to you?
I think the week 13 schedule might be my favorite so far of the year. Like it's a light schedule because we have 6 teams on bye week, but you kind of look like starting Thursday night, Seattle Cowboys, I think is a great test for Dallas coming off that huge win on Thanksgiving. I'm excited to see that game. You have Texans Broncos, 2 teams fighting, kind of at the bottom of the AFC. You have Falcons Jets to figure out who can win with worse quarterback play. You have Lions Saints, see if the Lions can bounce back. I mean, Colts Titans. You have a ton of great games leading up to Eagles 49ers at 425, which I feel like we've said every week, this is the biggest game of the year. I think that right now, I think the 49ers have been playing the best football when they're healthy. I think it's almost impossible to stop that offense. The Eagles defense has looked shaky at times. I'm really excited to watch that game. Like, to me right now, that is the most exciting game on the schedule moving forward. And I think it's a preview of the 2 best teams in the NFL playing right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you mentioned the Eagles defense. That run defense has not been, the pass defense has been shaky, especially on the outside, and it has been that all season. They had been able to rely on that run defense, and that has faltered a little bit here in the last, 2 weeks. And so they will get a real test against that 49ers team, Christian McCaffrey, that scheme. And so, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. What about you, Curtis?
Yeah, that's going to be an exciting game, and it's bigger for the 49ers, though. I do think there means more for them. They're in a bit more of a battle because I still think the Eagles could lose the next 2 games and still hold the NFC championship or game at home. So probably more important for the 49ers. And I'm looking forward to the Cowboys game against the Seahawks. The Seahawks, like, what did they do? They got to play the 49ers, Cowboys, 49ers, and Eagles in a 4-week stretch. Where did that come from? So they're looking at being on a 4-game losing streak and right in the thick of the playoff battle in a blink of an eye if Geno Smith doesn't get healthy or play any better than they have been. So that's an interesting storyline to watch because they were on cruise control. We were talking about them competing with the 49ers 3 weeks ago, I think, and we're going to see them in competing with the Packers for the final playoff spot in 3 weeks from now.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I think I preemptively called the NFC playoff picture outside of the NFC South. I called it set. And then and I knew about the Seahawks, schedule. I've been writing about that for several weeks in the power rankings, but I just, it slipped my mind. And now they're sitting here. They're only a game up on the Packers. They're only a game up on the Rams, the Vikings. They're tied with the Vikings. Suddenly that race for the 6 and 7 spot in the NFC, the Saints are there as well. That is suddenly looking a lot more interesting than it did a couple weeks ago. And so foolish of me to say that it was over. We'll be back next week to talk about all those games. I assume we will be watching live the end of the Eagles and 49ers because that's what we do. The Eagles play the longest games ever, and so we'll be watching the end of that. Make sure you come and join us. Remember, we do this live on YouTube at 7:30 Eastern every Sunday. Come and join us over there on YouTube. Stay tuned to the podcast. We've got our normal podcast schedule back this week. So I'll be back with Rich on Thursday, and then we'll have Todd and Ryan on Thursday as well. So Adam will be on Wednesday night, talking about Showdown. All of that will be back. Check that out. Remember, we have our big Cyber Monday sale going right now with 71% off over on the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com. Check that out. And we will be back to talk to you next week.